Welcome to a world of darkness and mystery, where laws are blurred and the truth lurks in the shadows. As night falls, a strange case shocks the city, and only one person can solve it, a detective like no other. A werewolf detective with a piercing gaze, extraordinary intuition, and unwavering determination. In a world where legends coexist with everyday life, Ace must face dangers beyond imagination. A remote village, a mysterious disappearance in the mountains, and clues to the truth that will make even the bravest man shiver. Embark on this thrilling case where every step will challenge you. Is the enemy human or something more sinister? This is the Werewolf Detective. Ready? Turn on your screen and find out. Tonight, we descend into a world where the bizarre is mundane and shadows conceal truths darker than night. A terrifying disappearance on a remote mountain demands Ace's expertise. Is the culprit a predator lurking in the shadows, or something far more sinister? Brace yourself for a tale where the boundary between man and monster twists into something unrecognizable. This is Ice Blue Eyes by Azure Star 03. Get comfortable with your favorite drink and dive into part 1, The Detective. My name is Ace, and I'm the one you call when mysteries grow too tangled for the usual methods. I'm a freelance investigator with a knack for navigating the inexplicable. Born in Chicago, raised in Edinburgh, I've spent 28 years honing skills sharp enough to cut through lies. But my past? That's a tale for another time. You need to know this. The world I inhabit isn't like yours. What you call extraordinary is just another Tuesday for me. Dragons guard banks, sea serpents linger in the depths, and humanoid creatures walk the streets. My current employer? Chief Hawkins of Blackwood Village Police, a literal grizzly bear, and not just in spirit. Our world is an untamed mosaic of myth and reality, and sometimes I love it. Other times, it's a nightmare I can't escape. This particular nightmare began on September 16, 2022. The shrill wail of my alarm clock wrestled me from sleep, only to be joined by the insistent chime of my phone. A bad omen for the day ahead. Groaning, I silenced the clock and snatched my phone. "Freelancer Maverick," I muttered, half awake. The voice on the other end was as rough as gravel dragged across glass. "Ace Maverick, this is Chief Hawkins, Blackwood Village Police. A friend vouched for your skills." I rolled my eyes. Of course, my Aussie friend had sold me out. "What do you need, Chief?" There was a pause, the faint shuffle of papers before his gruff reply. "We've got an unexplainable disappearance up on the mountain. I need someone like you to figure out what's really going on." "Can't wait. See you soon." The line went dead. I stood there, holding the phone, the weight of his words sinking in. A cold tendril of dread coiled around my chest, but I shoved it aside. The day had barely started, and already it demanded coffee. I prepared for the drive with my usual rituals. A scalding styrofoam cup of coffee, a scuffed long coat insulated with fur, and my trusty Webley revolver holstered at my side. My lupin ears twitched as I adjusted my shirt, a reminder of the quirks that came with my bloodline. Sliding into the driver's seat of my battered Jeep, a hand-me-down from my father, I set out for Blackwood Village. The road stretched ahead, empty and quiet, save for the haunting strains of "Embrace the Silence" by Depeche Mode pouring from the speakers. For now, the drive was serene, a fragile calm before the storm. I knew it wouldn't last. It never does. I'm going to enjoy it before I begin my work. Part 2. Blackwood Village. The road stretched endlessly, a ribbon of asphalt weaving through a desolate winter landscape. After 3 hours of driving, my playlist alternating between haunting melodies and gritty ballads, I finally approached the weathered Debmo. "Welcome to Blackwood Village" sign. The letters were chipped, the paint flaking like dead skin. Beyond the sign, the village lay nestled in the shadow of Black Mountain, its quaint charm masking secrets that lingered like a ghost in the fog. The streets were lively, a mix of the familiar and the fantastical. Humans mingled with other beings, creatures I'd only read about in the yellowing pages of folklore. A lizard-like vendor, possibly a kobold, hawked fruit at a street corner, while a towering, fur-covered crossing guard with wedge-shaped feet directed traffic with a steady hand and a tufted tail swishing against the cold wind. The diversity eased my tension. a reminder that my own differences might not stand out here. I pulled into the lot of the police department, the Jeep's tires crunching against the frost-dusted pavement. 3 vehicles were parked, their hulking silhouettes casting long shadows in the waning light. Perhaps the rest of the department was still at the scene, I mused grimly, adjusting my coat and wide-brimmed hat before stepping out. The station's front doors creaked as I pushed them open, a sound like a whispered warning. Inside, the warmth hit me first, then the lively receptionist's voice. "Oh, hello there, sugar," she chirped, her tone syrupy and maternal, yet with an edge that hinted she could silence a room with a glance. Her eyes, burning pools of amber, fixed on me. "Name's Ace," I said, offering a polite smile. "Chief asked to see me, something about an ongoing investigation." Recognition lit up her features. "Oh, of course. Let me tell him you're here." Her voice softened as she dialed the phone, her claws clicking lightly against the buttons. "Yes, sir. He's arrived." I'll send him right in." Hanging up, she gestured toward the hallway with a purr. "Down the hall to the left, sugar. He's waiting for you." With a nod, I followed her directions, each step echoing ominously. I knocked on the designated door, and a gruff voice growled from within. "Come in!" Chief Hawkins was a massive grizzly of a man, or rather, a literal grizzly bear. He rose to shake my hand, his paw engulfing mine in a firm grip before he gestured for me to sit. "Sorry about the delay, Mr. Maverick," he said, his voice a mix of gravel and authority. "This case is urgent. We need your expertise." He handed me a file, and as I flipped through the pages, my breath caught. 2 victims, a male and a female. Names leapt from the page like a physical blow, Drar Frost and Eric Woods. My hand trembled as I brushed my fingers over Drar's photo. The chief's gaze sharpened. "What's wrong?" he asked, his tone heavy with concern. "It's Drar," I whispered, my emerald eyes glinting with suppressed emotion. He's my boyfriend." My Jeep rolled to a stop outside a cabin perched precariously high on Black Mountain. The structure looked like it had been savaged by a tempest or something far worse. The roof sagged, windows shattered, and the door hung askew, its hinges barely holding. A police truck was already on the scene, its blue lights flashing weakly in the gloom. 2 officers approached as I stepped out. One, short and wiry, greeted me with a wave. "It's a bloodbath in there, Wolfie," he said, his smooth voice incongruously casual. "Shell casings and a rifle in the living room. We've got a forensics expert coming from Boulder to determine if the blood belongs to the victims or whatever did this." I scanned the cabin's porch, the wind biting through my coat. My ears tuned into the forest sounds, branches creaking, leaves whispering in the icy breeze. "No bodies?" I asked, my voice low. The taller officer shook his head, his voice a guttural rumble. "None. Not yet. We're keeping the scene intact until the experts arrive." Satisfied for now, I returned to my Jeep, popping the trunk. Hidden beneath a false panel, 3 long cases lay in wait. I retrieved the middle one, its surface marked with a wolf print stencil. Placing it on the hood, I closed the trunk, ensuring the other cases remained out of sight. The cabin loomed ahead, its shattered windows staring like empty sockets. Whatever had happened here wasn't just a crime. It was a warning, a dark prelude to something far more sinister. I unclipped the locks of the case, revealing a set of tools, a scanner and a print resin kit. The scanner hummed as I picked it up, a lifeline to truths buried in shadows. I moved across the property, scanning the damp earth under the watchful veil of the forest. The device processed track after track, dismissing the mundane, a deer's cautious tread, a bird's fleeting hop, a coyote's skittish gait. Then a green light pulsed. My breath caught. The scanner labeled the track Supernatural. Origins unknown. A thrill coursed through me, both dread and curiosity. Whatever this was, it had evaded cataloging, eluding even the relentless databases. Smiling faintly, I followed the trail to the forest's edge, my steps deliberate, the air heavy with expectation. Then came the shout from the house behind me, 5 words that turned my blood cold. "We have a live one." Part 3. The one that got away. I sat behind the one-way mirror, watching the chief talk to her, the survivor. Ellie Woods, Dree's childhood friend, she looked wrecked, Her red hair, a matted nest of dirt and twigs, hung over a face streaked with mud and tears. Her arms were covered in scratches, her clothes torn. Yet even in her disheveled state, there was something striking about her, a fragile, otherworldly poise. Her gray eyes stared past the chief, unseeing, stormy, and distant. When the chief left, he paused at the door to my observation room. "Your turn," he said gruffly. "Not sure she's going to talk. Hasn't said much since we found her." I nodded, bracing myself, and entered the room. The air was thick with tension. She didn't react as I took a seat across from her. Her hands, bandaged and trembling, rested on the table. To ease the silence, I fetched a cup of water, placing it in front of her. She stared at it for a long time, her cracked lips twitching. Finally, she picked it up, her movements deliberate, and took a small sip. Her gaze rose to meet mine, and for a brief moment, I caught a flicker of something. Trust, perhaps? I smiled gently. "Ellie, it's going to be okay," I said softly. "I just need you to tell me what happened. Walk me through it, step by step. Anything you can remember." Her eyes dropped to the table, her shoulders trembling under the weight of the silence. Rain drummed on the roof above, the sound broken only by her whisper. "It happened so fast," she said, her voice fragile. "I don't know what I saw. I don't know what happened to Dre. I'm so sorry." My heart clenched, but I kept my tone calm. "It's okay, Ellie, we'll find him. Just try. Nothing can surprise me anymore." She hesitated, her lips quivering as if wrestling with words too terrible to speak. Tears slid down her cheeks, carving tracks in the dirt. Finally, she choked out two words in a trembling voice. "Dim pain." I leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Her gaze flicked to mine, wide with desperation. "Forest demon," she whispered. The room seemed to darken. I scribbled the translation in my notebook, my pulse quickening. "Can you describe it?" At first, she only shivered, her voice caught in her throat. Then, in a voice so soft it barely carried, she said, "It was tall, thin, like it hadn't eaten in weeks. Its smell," she shuddered, "it reeked of rot. Its head was a skull." My pen froze mid-stroke. The word formed unbidden in my mind before I circled it 3 times in my notes. Wendigo. The thunderclap startled me awake. Sitting up in the small apartment provided during my stay, I glanced at the clock. 2:30 a.m. Sleep was impossible now. Groaning, I shuffled to the bathroom, splashing water on my face to shake off the lingering unease. But as the water dripped from my chin, I noticed something odd, a faint prickling sensation along my arms. I rolled up my sleeves, my stomach dropping. Black fur, coarse and dark, was creeping across my skin. I cursed under my breath. It wasn't the full moon yet. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not so soon. The transformation always progressed gradually, in rhythm with the lunar cycle. But tonight was different. Something was wrong. Scratching at the sharp sting in my arm, I winced, my fingers brushing across fresh scratches, long, deep. When I glanced at my nails, they were sharper, longer. Realization hit me like a blow. My kind had rules, patterns, predictability. Whatever had happened in those woods, it was breaking all of them. The night stretched around me, heavy and ominous. I could feel it in the air. Something ancient, something hungry. And it wasn't finished yet. A sound cut through the oppressive silence. A whistle. Soft and melodic, yet chilling. It wasn't the tune itself, but the feeling it evoked. A sinister undertone that sent shivers crawling up my spine. My fingers twitched instinctively toward the grip of my Webbel, yanking it from its holster with practiced urgency. I spun toward the darkness, gun raised, heart pounding in rhythm with the fading whistle. From the shadows, a man emerged. His polished appearance contrasted starkly with the malevolence that lingered in the air around him. A tailored black suit, pristine vest, and gleaming dress shoes framed his figure. His hair was perfectly styled, but the illusion of refinement shattered when my gaze met his eyes. Amber, piercing, unnatural. And when he smiled, the sharp glint of his canines confirmed my dread. He spread his arms wide, a twisted parody of an embrace, and spoke in the heavily accented voice that haunted my memories. "What's wrong, Ace? No greeting for your dear old dad?" The words hit me like a physical blow. My grip on the pistol tightened. "You're not my father," I spat, venom dripping from every syllable. "Ian Maverick, the werewolf who turned me, That doesn't make you family. Ian tilted his head, amused. He stepped closer, undeterred by the gun trained on his chest, his gaze dissecting me as if I were a puzzle he intended to solve. Still sharp-tongued, I see, he murmured, almost to himself. Tell me, boy, why the hostility? Is that any way to treat the one who gave you your true nature? My voice rose, anger surging like wildfire. You didn't give me anything but a curse. You stole my life, and now you're here. Why? To gloat? How did you even find me? He sighed, dismissing my outburst as though it were the tantrum of a child. With an air of practiced ease, he sank into a chair, pulling a flask from his jacket and taking a long, deliberate sip. When he spoke again, the affected civility was gone, replaced by a gruff, almost contemptuous tone. So you're still playing the hero. Tell me, Ace, why bother? You're wasting your time. I remained standing, gun unwavering. If not me, then who? Someone has to protect people from monsters like you. Ian chuckled, low and rumbling. The sound grated against my nerves. You're so predictable, he said, leaning back in the chair. Saving lives, is it? Noble, sure, but misguided. You'll see eventually. This world doesn't need heroes, especially not ones like you. My composure cracked. You self-righteous bastard. While I'm out here trying to stop people from suffering like I did? You're what? Watching? Laughing? His expression hardened for the first time, the mocking grin replaced by something colder. Temper, boy, he said, rising slowly to his feet. You've got fire. I'll give you that. But one day, that fire will lead you to something far worse than me. And when it does, it'll either break you, kill you, or if you're lucky, teach you the humility you clearly lack. I mirrored his movement, finger brushing the trigger, ready for anything. Yet Ian only straightened his jacket and moved toward the door. He paused with one hand on the handle, glancing back over his shoulder. Watch your back, he said, the warning laced with quiet menace. Not everything is as it seems, Ace. With that, he stepped into the rain, leaving me alone with the echo of his whistle and the storm outside. The gun felt heavy in my hand as I collapsed onto the couch, the tension in my body giving way to exhaustion. Covering my ears, I tried to block out the sound, but it lingered, a phantom melody, haunting and relentless. Tears slipped down my face as memories of that fateful night surfaced again, a cruel reminder of the life I could never return to. Part 4, The Breakthrough. The night had been restless, haunted by my father's visit, or whatever apparition that had been. I couldn't shake the gnawing question. How had he entered my apartment on the second floor without using the door? Sleep was a futile ambition, so I drowned my disquiet in 3 cups of black coffee, the bitter brew mirroring my mood. I readied myself for the day, taking extra care as I handled my Webley. Unloaded. I cursed under my breath at my own recklessness. A single-speed loader of .45 ACP brought the revolver back to life, its reassuring weight settling into the chest holster beneath my coat. Discretion was necessary today. This wasn't the kind of case where you risked a weapon being snatched from your hip. 3 additional speed loaders joined my arsenal, better safe than dead. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the silence. Hawkins' name lit up the screen. Before I could even greet him, his voice burst forth with urgency. Maverick, we've got a breakthrough. Get down here ASAP! The line went dead. His excitement reverberated in my mind for a full 30 seconds before I sprang into motion. I tore down the stairs of my apartment building, my boots thundering against the steps, and practically leapt into my Jeep. The drive to the station was a blur, a reckless sprint through the city, every red light and traffic rule an afterthought. Parking haphazardly at the station, I burst into the chief's office, panting, my breath clouding in the cold air. Hawkins greeted me with a toothy grin, his excitement contagious. He motioned for me to sit, then slid a file across the desk. I froze as I took in the cover, a golden and white eye emblazoned on it, cold and unblinking. My stomach twisted. What did you tell him? I asked, my voice tight. What did he ask for in return? Hawkins raised a hand to calm me, shaking his head with a gravity that belied his usual cheer. Nothing. He said he owed you. Told me you'd handle it when all this is over. I stared at him, disbelief warring with unease, but Hawkins' expression remained steady. Slowly, I opened the file. The name Casassus Blackwood Mears was highlighted in yellow, leaping off the page like a curse. My heart sank. Casassus Mears, the son of Isaac Blackwood, founder of Blackwood Village, a man dead since 1893. This doesn't make sense, I murmured, my voice hollow. Casassus has been dead for over a century. How could this thing be him? Hawkins shrugged helplessly. Cryptids aren't my field, he admitted. The file's contents painted a chilling picture. Missing persons reports, hospital admissions, coroner's records, and grotesque crime scene photos. I shut the file with trembling hands, meeting Hawkins' gaze. His eyes mirrored my unease, but his shrug was a silent apology. Thanks, Hawkins, I said, my voice thin. I left the station, gripping the file tightly, and shot off a text to someone I wasn't eager to see. The reply came swiftly. See you soon, mate. Part 5. The Deal Maker. It was nearly 10 p.m. when he finally appeared. I was halfway through a bowl of spicy noodles, their heat numbing my anxiety, when a sharp click of his tongue behind me shattered my focus. I gagged, nearly choking, and clattered the bowl onto the table. After what felt like an eternity of coughing and gulping down water, I turned, glaring daggers at my uninvited guest. There he stood, the very picture of polished menace. He was dressed impeccably, a gold and white suit jacket tarnished just enough to look ancient, his vest gleaming in deep bronze. His hands shimmered like rose gold, but it was his eyes, serpentine slits burning with arrogance, that stole the air from the room. His smile was too perfect, teeth gleaming as if carved from pearls. He tapped his ebony cane, its gold stallion head glinting in the dim light, and slid into the chair across from me, his movements unnervingly smooth. G'day, Ace, he drawled in that infuriatingly calm Australian accent. Been a while, hasn't it, mate? I glared at him, my irritation bubbling over. How many times have I told you not to sneak up on me? I could have shot you. His smile only widened. And yet you didn't, mate. That's why I like you. Shuck leaned back in his chair, a sly grin stretching across his face as he intertwined his fingers. His laughter, low and serpentine, filled the dimly lit room. What can I say? I like watching them jump out of their skin, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. In Melbourne, it's a bit of a pastime for me. But most other circles of the wild serpent? Oh, they don't take kindly to my tricks. Shuck was no ordinary being. A trickster of near-ancient lineage, he belonged to a clandestine gathering of humanoids, each bearing a singular, dangerous gift. Among them, Shuck was the infamous deal-maker, wielding his serpent's tongue to lure mortals into treacherous bargains. Souls were his usual currency, but he had claimed far worse. My jaw clenched as I bared my slowly sharpening fangs, a hiss of disdain escaping my lips. Enough stalling, I growled. You said you wanted to talk, so talk. I don't have all night. Shuck clicked his tongue, his golden eyes gleaming with malicious delight as he leaned forward. Ah, patience, mate, he purred. Let's get to it then. You see, I've decided to help you with this hopeless little investigation of yours. But, his grin widened, revealing teeth far too sharp for a man. If you want the last piece of the puzzle, you'll have to make a deal. Rage bubbled beneath my skin as I glared at him. When we became partners, he had vowed never to entangle me in his schemes, unless it was to save a life. The sadistic glint in his eyes made it clear this was personal. You must be joking, I spat. You're jealous, aren't you? Shuck ignored my accusation, his voice taking on a sing-song quality. If I give you the missing piece, I want the girl. The blood drained from my face. Erixa? Her name came out as a strangled whisper, my horror growing at the implications. This wasn't about me. It was about her. No, I said firmly. I won't do it. That girl has suffered enough. Shuck chuckled, and for a fleeting moment his face shifted. His human guise melted away, revealing a monstrous visage, a single enormous eye set in the center of his head, surrounded by rows of jagged, glinting teeth. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the grotesque image vanished, replaced by his usual smirking expression. She's broken beyond repair, he murmured, his words like poison. She'll never be the same again, and when she learns what you are, she'll leave you anyway. He wasn't entirely wrong, but I refused to believe it. Desperation clawed at me as I blurted, What if I offer you something else? Something more important? Shuck paused, intrigued. The room seemed to hold its breath. I'm listening, he said, his grin widening. My heart thundered in my chest. You can have me, I said, swallowing hard. We agreed my soul was off limits, but if it spares her, take me instead. For what felt like an eternity, Shuck considered my offer, his claw-like nails tapping rhythmically on the table. Then, finally, he leaned back with a triumphant smile and uttered the words that would seal my fate. We have a deal. 2 days later, I sat in my apartment, my mind still reeling from Shuck's visit. On the table before me lay 2 cases, retrieved from the hidden compartment under my Jeep's floorboards. The first bore the emblem of a phoenix, the second marked with a gas mask insignia. Opening the phoenix case, I revealed a meticulously maintained SA-58 rifle, its rich mahogany furniture gleaming under the harsh light. Nestled alongside it were 2 30-round magazines and boxes of .308 Full Metal Jacket rounds. Beneath the foam lining rested a Winchester 1897 trench shotgun, its blued barrel shining like liquid steel. A wicked bayonet lay beside it, and a trio of double-aught buckshot boxes completed the arsenal. The final case held an armored vest I'd borrowed from the SWAT team in Moab. The black material bore the symbol of a white sun at its center. As I stared at the array of tools before me, a grim determination settled over me. Shuck's deal might have bought me the answer I needed, but the cost? It was a debt I might never escape. And so, the hunt resumed. Chuckled darkly as he leaned back in his chair, his serpentine fingers intertwining like the coils of a predator biding its time. His smile was unsettling, calculated, a mask of mirth concealing something far more sinister. What can I say? He drawled, his voice as smooth as silk stretched too thin. I like it when they leap out of their skins. They do that a lot in Melbourne. Can't pull it off in the more refined circles, though. She was no ordinary trickster. He was a deal-maker of ancient renown, a creature whose origins were whispered in half-remembered legends. Among his kind, he was infamous, a manipulator with a tongue that could coax mortals into bartering their most precious treasures. Souls were his usual currency, but I'd heard whispers of darker bargains, of things far worse than death. I glared at him, my own resolve hardening like steel. My fangs, sharp and gleaming, caught the dim light as I hissed through clenched teeth. Enough games, Shith. You said you wanted to talk. Then talk. I don't have all night. His amusement only deepened. Shith leaned forward, his eyes glinting like twin flames, alight with a sadistic joy. Ah, yes, he purred. Let's get to it, mate. I've decided to help you out, give you the edge you so desperately need in this hopeless little investigation of yours. He let the words linger, their weight pressing down like a storm on the horizon. But, he continued, his grin widening, I wasn't about to hand it over to that lazy bear of yours for free. If you want the last piece of the puzzle, we'll need to strike a deal. My stomach turned. Fury and betrayal rose within me, an unstoppable tide. When we'd first partnered, he'd sworn that his games would never involve me. Only dire circumstances could justify bending that rule. And this wasn't dire. This was personal. You're jealous, I spat before I could stop myself, my voice trembling with equal parts anger and disbelief. His expression didn't waver, but the glint in his eyes told me I'd struck a nerve. If you want the final piece, he said, his voice deceptively calm, I want the girl. Eric's. His words hit me like a blow. Horror washed over me as the intent behind his demand became clear. This wasn't just about the case. It was about power, control, about him proving he still had the upper hand. No, I growled, shaking my head. Not her. That poor girl has suffered enough. I won't do it. Chuckled, and for an instant his human guise faltered. His face shimmered, revealing a grotesque visage, an equine skull with a single monstrous eye, its maw bristling with rows of jagged teeth. It was gone in a heartbeat, but the image seared itself into my mind. I fought to keep my composure, my exterior cold and unreadable even as my insides churned. She's broken, mate, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. She'll never be the same, and when she finds out what you are, do you really think she'll want anything to do with you? He wasn't wrong. The truth would destroy whatever fragile bond we'd built. But the idea of sacrificing her, it wasn't an option. My mind raced, grasping for an alternative, until finally I blurted out a desperate plea. What if? I hesitated, my throat tightening. What if I offer you something else? Something just as important to me? Schtitz's grin widened, his eyes narrowing in interest. I'm listening. Swallowing hard, I forced the words out before my courage failed me. You can have me. My soul. We agreed, no taking it. But I'll give it freely if it means sparing her. For the first time, Scht paused. He tapped his claw-like nails against the table, the rhythmic sound echoing like a death knell in the oppressive silence. Seconds stretched into agonizing minutes before he finally spoke. We have a deal. His words sealed my fate, echoing in my mind like a tolling bell. And in that moment, I realized that while I might have won her freedom, I had stepped irrevocably into the abyss. Let me know if you'd like to refine this further. Part 6. The Elf. 2 days had crawled by since Shook's visit. The cases sat ominously on the table in my dimly lit apartment. The first, pulled from beneath the trunk boards of my Jeep, bore the insignia of a phoenix. The second was marked by the haunting silhouette of a gas mask. I flipped open the phoenix case, its contents gleaming like relics of a forgotten war. Nestled in the foam was an SA-58 rifle, its mahogany furniture rich and polished like something from another era. 2 30-round magazines lay beside it, their brass-tipped rounds catching the light. Beneath them, 2 boxes of .308 full-metal jacket ammunition were snugly packed. I removed the rifle, its weight both familiar and foreboding, and set it carefully on the chair. Lifting the foam lining revealed another weapon, a Winchester 1897 trench sweeper. Its blued metal barrel shimmered under the weak glow of the overhead light, and the bayonet beside it sparkled like a cursed jewel. 3 boxes of double-aught buckshot completed the ensemble. I set the shotgun aside, its cold presence lingering in the room, before turning my attention to the last case. Inside lay an armored vest, black as midnight, emblazoned with the stark white insignia of the SWAT team in Moab. Yet something was missing. My ammo sling and duty belt. I'd left them in the Jeep. The realization came just as a flicker of movement outside caught my eye. I stepped out into the cool night and saw him. A half-elf male, peering into the back of my vehicle. His pointed ears were barely visible under the streetlight's faint glow. Hey! My voice cut through the night like a blade. What the hell are you doing? Get away from my Jeep! He jolted upright, eyes wide and filled with the raw fear of prey caught in the predator's gaze. He looked like his soul had momentarily escaped him, and by the time his feet hit the ground again, I had closed the distance between us. The moonlight glinted off my fangs as I snarled, letting my wolfish nature bleed into my expression. He whimpered, shrinking before me, and stammered out a pathetic plea. I'm sorry. Please, don't eat me. I scoffed, curling my lip with a mixture of annoyance and dark amusement. Calm yourself, Pointed Ears. I don't eat elves. They sit heavy on the stomach. He gulped, his knees nearly giving out beneath him. I clamped a hand on his shoulder, steering him away from the Jeep. Next time, I warned, I might reconsider. Now, what were you doing snooping around here? His response froze me mid-step. You're looking for Kaz, aren't you? Let me help. Please, I can't stand by while someone sends a lone supernatural after him. The name struck a chord deep within me, a place I tried to bury under duty and fury. My eyes narrowed as I turned to him, my voice dropping to a growl. First of all, don't call me that. My name is Ace. Second, what do you know about Kaz? Why are you even interested in him? The elf hesitated, his gaze darting away before he spoke in a quieter, steadier voice. I overheard you talking to Chief Hawkins. You're an outsider. I was curious about what brought you here. So I listened. He said it so plainly, but the admission hit like a thunderclap. For him to eavesdrop on me, and Hawkins no less, he must have been a ghost. Still, his stealth was less concerning than the possibility he knew about Dre. I exhaled sharply, gesturing toward my apartment. Inside, now. Once seated in the chair by my table, he spilled everything he knew. His name was Carl, and he had been listening to every conversation I'd had since my arrival. My irritation was tinged with reluctant respect for his cunning. When he finished, the roles reversed, and his curiosity turned on me. "Who's Dree?" he asked, nodding toward the weapons laid out like grim offerings. "What does he mean to you, to need all this firepower?" I froze, the question unraveling something in my chest. Lying wasn't an option. Not now. "He's everything," I murmured, the words barely audible. Everything. Memories I'd fought to suppress surged forward, clawing their way into the present. The last time I'd seen Dree, the warmth of his smile, the light in his eyes flashed before me. Then came the darkness, the moment everything had been ripped away. My sun and stars were gone, and with them the life I'd known. But Cass was the key. And if this half-elf thought he could help, then I wasn't about to turn him away. Not yet. Part 7. The Wolf 1 month earlier. The shrill chime of my alarm pierced the morning stillness. 8 a.m. My phone's insistent buzz dragged me from the clutches of restless dreams. The scent of breakfast, a blend of maple and butter, coiled through the air like a siren's call, coaxing me to consciousness. Groggy but compelled, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, slipped into worn slippers, and padded toward the kitchen. There he was, standing at the stove, humming softly to himself. He stirred a pan of eggs with an ease that belied the chaos that had once defined my life. Dreer Frost, a man who seemed more out of place in my world than the fragile peace we'd built together, was my anchor. The sunlight caught the edges of his long brown hair, making it glow faintly, and the steady rhythm of his movements lulled me into a rare moment of calm. I approached, slipping my arms around his waist, my chin resting lightly on his shoulder. He paused, turning his head slightly, a smile tugging at his lips. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," he murmured, his voice warm as fresh bread. "You slept through 3 alarms. Let me guess, the smell woke you up." A laugh escaped me, low and rumbling, cutting through the remnants of sleep. "When doesn't it?" He chuckled in return, his hazel eyes sparkling like sunlight through autumn leaves. Even after everything, after all he'd seen, all he knew, he looked at me without fear. That had been the moment I knew he was different, that I could trust him. I reached for my coffee mug, preparing my usual concoction of black coffee, cream, sugar, and a splash of Bailey's. As I stirred, he placed a plate before me, over-easy eggs, maple-glazed ham, fried potatoes, and sourdough toast. Enough to rival a feast. My stomach growled its approval, but curiosity tugged at the edges of my thoughts. "What's the occasion?" I asked, glancing up at him. Dreer's smile turned sheepish as he nodded toward the calendar. I followed his gaze, my eyes landing on the mark indicating tonight's new moon. My chest tightened. The new moon always left me vulnerable, my energy sapped to dangerous lows. But Dreer, as always, remembered. He understood. We ate in comfortable silence, broken only by the occasional scrape of a fork or a quiet chuckle. Between bites, he mentioned an upcoming hunting trip, a journey to a secluded cabin in Colorado with his hunting club. I nodded, filing the information away with little thought. Dreer had always been a hunter, a butcher's apprentice by trade, with an uncanny knack for bringing home the most exquisite game. His skills had earned him a nickname that echoed among locals, the Hunter. That he had chosen to love me, a being feared and reviled by most, still felt like an unspoken miracle. I remembered the first time he saw me transform. The wildness, the primal rage, it should have sent him running. But instead, he had reached for me, his hand steady as he cupped my lupine head and whispered, "I'm not afraid." That moment had been our turning point. From then on, we were inseparable, bound by a trust that defied reason. I had proposed to him a month ago on our favorite mountain trail, the moonlight our only witness. The present day. A sharp voice pulled me from my reverie. "Hey, big guy, you okay?" I blinked, shaking my head to dispel the haze that clung to my thoughts. Carl stood before me, his brow creased with concern. The half-elf's gaze flickered to the stranger nearby, the man I'd caught peering into my Jeep. The air between us felt charged, as though the past and present were colliding in a way I couldn't yet grasp. "Yeah," I muttered finally, my voice rough and distant. But the truth gnawed at the edges of my mind. Something about this day felt off, an unspoken tension, a sense of being watched. Carl didn't seem convinced. He cleared his throat, casting a wary glance at the stranger. "Look, man." The words hung in the air like an unfinished melody, heavy with the weight of something unsaid. This version heightens the mystery with richer descriptions, lingering suspense, and a focus on the emotional and supernatural undercurrents of the story. Let me know if you'd like further tweaks. I hadn't walked in your shoes, but hopelessness has a way of radiating like a beacon. What are you afraid of? His words were calm, almost taunting, but they cut deeper than any blade, slicing into the raw, aching fear buried inside me. I clenched my fists, willing myself not to react, but his relentless questioning wore me down. "What are you so afraid of, Lion?" The dam burst. My voice rose before I could stop it, trembling with pain and fury. "I'm afraid he's dead. I'm afraid I can't save him. I'm afraid of losing someone else I love. Is that what you want to hear?" Kyle didn't flinch, but I saw the faintest flicker in his eyes as my outburst echoed in the room. Tears streamed down my face, hot and uncontrollable, mixing anguish and anger. I pulled at my hair, biting my lip until I tasted blood, desperate for the pain to drown out the storm inside me. He stepped closer, his hand brushing my arm. I recoiled instinctively, glaring at him through tear-blurred eyes. "Stop acting like a child," he snapped, his voice cold and unyielding. "You think you're the only one carrying this weight? Blaming yourself for something out of your control is pathetic." The wolf inside me stirred, craving release, but I wrestled it down, breathing hard. Kyle waited, unbothered, as if daring me to lash out. When I finally stilled, he leaned back, folding his arms. "Good. Now we can focus. We need a plan." I stared at him, caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone. "We?" A smirk played on his lips. "Of course. You didn't think I'd let you handle this alone, did you? Besides, you'll need someone who knows these woods and what hunts in them." He finished with an exaggerated bow, clearly amused by my confusion. Despite myself, a sharp snort escaped my throat. "Fine," I muttered, wiping my face. "But we'll need help, someone who knows herbs and medicine. Eric's a trained apothecary. Maybe she can." I hesitated. Kyle raised an eyebrow. "What?" "She's under Hawkins' watch at the station." He waved it off casually. "Let me deal with Hawkins. You focus on getting Eric on board." Doubt gnawed at me, but I nodded reluctantly. Kyle was confident, even if I wasn't. "What about the chief?" I asked, testing the waters. "Think he'll help us?" Kyle laughed dryly. "Convince Hawkins to join us on a monster hunt? Sure, why not? What could go wrong?" I shook my head, amused despite the circumstances. "Guess it's worth a shot." The Jeep roared to life as we drove toward the station. The sky had darkened, clouds rolling in ominously. Rain scented the air, and the wind carried whispers of the coming storm. "Cassus Myers," Hawkins repeated, his gruff voice laced with disbelief. "The same Myers this town buried 163 years ago?" I nodded, leaning against the wall. "That's what our elf friend here says. Whether he's connected to this or the cause of it, we won't know until we dig deeper." Eric sat beside Kyle, visibly stronger than the last time I'd seen her. Hawkins' skeptical gaze shifted between us, his doubt palpable. "And you want me to join this suicide mission?" "No," I said with a dry smile. "I just wanted you to hear the plan." Hawkins declined after a moment's hesitation, but Eric's resolve never wavered. She agreed instantly. That night we regrouped at the motel, exhaustion settling over us like a heavy shroud. Kyle and Eric disappeared into their rooms, but I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind replayed every detail, the location, the timeline, the target. On the nightstand, my weapon glinted in the dim light. I reached for it, running my fingers over its cold surface. "I'm coming, Dre," I whispered. "Just hold on." The words faded into the wind outside, and at last, sleep claimed me. Part 8, reckoning as the storm lessened. The storm outside had begun to subside, but inside, the tension was palpable. I pulled on my boots, feeling their tight grip, almost as if they, too, knew what this night would bring. This was the moment, the one I had been waiting for. Tonight, I would reclaim Dre and maybe, just maybe, put an end to this twisted mystery. As I tightened the last laces, I stood tall, my heart racing in anticipation. I slid my vest on over my head and snapped the duty belt around my waist. My pistol nestled securely in its holster, extra magazines for my rifle and speed loaders for my sidearm at the ready. I grabbed the SA-58 from the table where I'd left it the night before, loaded a fresh magazine, and slung it over my back. The weight of it, the weight of everything I was about to face, felt real now. I grabbed my hiking bag and headed for the door. The quiet hum of the storm outside was a backdrop to the pounding in my chest. I paused at Kyle's door, knocking twice, then waited. Silence. 5 minutes passed before the door creaked open. There stood Kyle, dressed in an outfit that made me pause, something between fantasy and practicality, like a character from one of Dree's old Dungeons and Dragons sessions. A leather tunic, worn jeans, hiking boots, and bracers. A quiver of arrows was strapped to his back, and a finely crafted bow rested in his hands. At his hip, a blade glinted. He wore no pack, but a military poncho was draped over his left shoulder, its hood pulled low over his face. He gave me a grin, a spark of enthusiasm in his eyes. "Well, what are you looking at? Let's get going." I nodded, appreciative of his resolve, and we made our way down the stairs to the Jeep. The weight of the night's journey hung heavy in the air. We had one final stop, Eric's. Then the forest. As I slid into the passenger seat, I glanced at my phone. The lock screen flashed with a photo of Dre mid-laugh, his face illuminated by the glow of a glitter bomb that had exploded in his hands. That moment of joy, the kind I always tried to bring him, solidified my resolve. I would bring him back, no matter the cost. Kyle and I sat in silence as the Jeep rolled toward Eric's apartment. My free hand grazed the grip of my pistol, the cold metal comforting as I prepared myself for what was to come. No one spoke until we pulled into the parking spot, the hum of the engine dying down. We left our weapons in the car, Kyle's knife and my pistol, and made our way toward the courtyard. There in the center sat Eric. Her hiking bag rested at her feet, the weight of it all too real. A knife, bone, and leather hung from her belt. The blade was inscribed with runes I couldn't place. As she stood and grabbed her bag, I noticed the quiet determination in her eyes. Without a word, the three of us returned to the Jeep. The mountain awaited us, and with it, the grim task that lay ahead. The drive was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Kyle eventually broke the silence, his voice cutting through the tension. "So, what happens if we find him? If we find Dre?" His words hung in the air, thick with uncertainty. I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to say it aloud, but the truth was too painful to face. I couldn't allow myself to consider that Dre might not be alive. The silence between us said it all. Kyle glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes understanding my lack of response. He fell quiet again. Eric traced the hammer of Thor around her neck, a silent prayer of hope. Kyle twirled a lucky arrowhead between his fingers. I found myself tracing the contours of my own hammer, the comforting weight of it in my palm grounding me. As we reached the footpath, the unmistakable sight of the sheriff's off-roader came into view. The three of us exchanged a glance, our resolve solidifying. We disembarked, grabbing our gear as we moved. Eric was the first to open the trunk, retrieving my shotgun with careful precision. Kyle suddenly gasped, drawing both Eric's and my attention. I turned, ready for anything. And then out of the shadows emerged a figure, a familiar face, worn but resolute. The sheriff's wide-brimmed hat and casual street clothes seemed out of place here, but there was no mistaking the man who crossed his arms with a weary, resigned smile. Chief Hawkins. "Well, seems you three are hell-bent on doing this," he said, his voice heavy with a mix of concern and admiration. "Someone has to make sure you come out of this alive, even if there's an extra body or a living one left in your wake." I didn't crack a smile this time. The air had grown thick with the weight of what was to come. I nodded grimly, signaling Eric to hand over the trench gun, its bandolier of shells resting heavy across his broad shoulder. With a practiced motion, he slung it over, pumping the shotgun to chamber a round as the four of us ventured into the murk that was the Black Mountain woods. The night was suffocating, and a thick, oppressive fog curled between the trees, cutting off the stars above. Our flashlights, one of Hawkins's leading the way, cast pale beams through the suffocating darkness. The canopy of leaves blocked out the sky, and the air held a dense, metallic smell, familiar and sickening. The stench of blood. My heart raced as I felt it, the scent digging into my bones. A memory, sharp and bitter, rose within me. I quickened my pace, driven by something primal, something that clawed at my chest. Kyle, always observant, noticed my change in pace, his gaze flickering to the back of my shirt, where dark fur rippled across my skin. I shook my head sharply, the change barely noticeable. The forest seemed to close in around us as the air thickened with the copper tang of death. We followed the scent, the trail narrowing until we arrived at the mouth of a cave. The jagged rocks surrounding it were clawed, scarred by something massive, ancient. Dried stains marred the earth, each one a silent testament to the horrors that had unfolded here. Without a word, we pressed on, moving deeper into the cave's winding passages, our breaths sharp in the oppressive silence. Hawkins and I held our guns at the ready, while Kyle notched an arrow, his bow taut. Eric gripped her knife with knuckles white from tension. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in, the urgency mounting. My mind kept repeating one phrase over and over, "I'm coming, I'm coming." The words echoed in my head, a desperate mantra that urged my feet forward. After what felt like a lifetime of twisting tunnels, we entered a cavern, vast and chilling. The scent of blood was overwhelming here, thicker, more potent. My pulse hammered in my ears as I scanned the room, my eyes locking on the slab at the center. My heart stopped. There he was, my partner, lying motionless. A cold terror gripped me as I ran toward him, slinging my rifle over my shoulder and pulling my knife free, frantic to sever the bindings that held him. "Dre," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It's me. Open your eyes, please. Please. Show me that you're okay." My hands trembled as I shook him, repeating his name over and over. The words were a pleading cry. I felt like a child begging for a lost mother, helpless in the face of the unthinkable. Tears blurred my vision. My breath hitched as I buried my face in his chest, sobbing. I couldn't hear the others shouting, their voices lost beneath the rising tide of my grief. The only thing that mattered was Dre, cold and lifeless before me. Then a sound cut through the silence, a shotgun's roar. Hawkins had cycled a shell, and we froze. A voice smooth as silk but cold as ice slithered into the cavern. "Well, well, well," the man said, stepping into the room. His pale blue eyes gleamed like frost. "You must be his partner. He's been ranting about you, how you'd save him, all this nonsense. It was cute at first, but annoying, so I gave him something to quiet him down." Rage boiled up from the depths of my gut, scorching everything in its path. My hands shook with fury as I unshouldered my rifle, flicking the safety off and setting it to full auto. Hawkins raised his shotgun, and Kyle drew another arrow, his eyes locked on the figure. Eric tightened her grip on her knife. "Kill him," I whispered, my voice a low growl. Gunfire shattered the air. Hawkins and I unleashed a hail of bullets. The sound echoed, deafening in the cavern as my first magazine emptied into the man. No, the thing. He grinned, blood seeping from his wounds, unfazed. He opened his mouth, but it was no longer human. His voice croaked out, filled with malice. My turn. The ground trembled beneath us as something monstrous began to take shape. The man's body shifted grotesquely, bones cracking, skin splitting as if the very flesh rejected its human form. His robe shredded, revealing black fur, a foul, decaying hide that clung to bones as sharp as knives. Long, twisted antlers jutted from his skull, their tips sharp enough to impale. His face, it was no longer human, but the skull of a massive dead deer, grinning with savage glee. Two burning blue flames flickered in the hollow of his eyes, colder than the abyss itself. He laughed, a horrible wet sound. "Now we can get this feast started properly." He lunged, a blur of rage and hunger, screeching as he closed the distance. Hawkins fired again, but it was useless. The beast swatted him aside with the force of a hurricane. Kyle fired 3 arrows, each finding its mark, but the monster barely slowed. Eric darted to the side, nimble as she dropped her pack, her focus razor sharp. I barely had time to reload my rifle before the creature was upon me, its claws slashing through the air. I fired 2 shots, but they were nothing compared to the monstrous fury in its eyes. It was coming for us all, and we were out of time. The air was thick with tension, suffocating in its silence, broken only by the soft hiss of Casas's breath. A cruel smile tugged at his lips as he raised his foot and, with a sickening crack, sent me crashing into the cold stone wall, the impact reverberating through my skull. My vision blurred, head ringing, as I lifted it from the rubble. The sight before me twisted my insides. My ragtag group of allies, those few I had just begun to trust, were being beaten into submission. And then I saw Dree rage ignited within me, white-hot and uncontrollable. My own clothes tore apart as my body convulsed with power. Black fur erupted in thick, painful swaths, covering my limbs as they grew, twisting into lupine legs, claws extending and sharpening to wicked points. My head stretched into a wolf's form, ears flicking with fury as saliva dripped from my fangs. My amber eyes burned with an unholy fire, searing through the chaos as my mouth split into a snarling snarl. The air grew heavy as I howled, a sound so feral, so primal, it made the very walls of the cavern shudder. Casasus turned, his eyes narrowing in amusement. Well, well, you really are full of surprises, aren't you? He sneered, his voice a venomous rasp. This will be more fun than I thought. He kicked Hawkins aside, tossing Kyle with no more care than a discarded rag doll. Eric rushed to him, her hands shaking as she unwrapped the medical bag, her face a mask of determination. My body shook with the need to strike, but first I had to deal with Casasus. I charged, slamming into him with all the fury of a beast unleashed. Our bodies locked in a deadly dance, claws raking across his flesh, his own jagged talons slicing through my fur and skin alike. Blood spilled from both of us, pooling in dark patches on the stone floor. The wretched scrape of Casasus's claws dragged across the rock, a sound that tore at my senses. My ears twitched involuntarily, my lip curling in disgust as I growled low, my voice thick with anger. I'll kill you for what you did to him. If I find so much as a scratch on him, I'll carve your rotten heart into pieces. A cruel laugh echoed from his throat. You think you can stop me? You don't know anything. The battle resumed, a blur of snarls and slashes. My fury, my hunger, drove me to fight harder, but Casasus was no fool. He danced out of reach, his blows landing with sickening force. A punch to my chest sent me crashing to the ground, stars exploding in my vision. Pain seared through me, my body struggling to keep up with the assault. I groaned, my body trembling under the weight of it all, and then Casasus was on me, straddling my chest, laughing with that guttural, wet chuckle. His fists descended, pummeling my face with merciless force. Each blow felt like fire, each strike sending black spots across my vision as my skull rattled. The darkness at the edges of my sight threatened to swallow me whole. Then gunfire. The first shot echoed through the cavern, a deafening crack that rang out like a bell. Casasus froze, his head snapping towards the sound. My eyes followed, landing on Drar, his hands trembling as he clutched a weapon, his fear palpable. Casasus hesitated, and that hesitation cost him. 3 more shots tore through the air, each one striking him, first his arm, then his chest, and finally his skull. The moment of weakness was all I needed. With a snarl, I thrust my arm forward, burying my claws deep into his chest, feeling the pulsing black heart beneath his flesh. I ripped it free, the sound of it tearing through his ribcage sickening in its intensity. Casasus screamed, his voice breaking into a pitiful whimper as he collapsed to his knees. I held his heart in my hand, its blackened, beating pulse thrumming against my palm. I squeezed. The organ cracked, its contents spilling out like a burst balloon, slick and foul. The light in Casasus's eyes dimmed, and with a final strangled moan, his body slumped to the stone floor, dead. I stared down at him, exhilaration flooding my veins as I watched the life drain from his twisted form. But the triumph was short-lived. My vision blurred, the edges of my world fraying as the weight of exhaustion crashed over me. I collapsed. When I awoke, I was no longer in the cave. The steady beep of an EKG machine filled the air, a soft reminder that I was alive. My body screamed in protest, every muscle aching as if I had been run ragged. But there was another sensation, a warmth, a comforting weight on my chest. My eyes flickered open, and I found Dree, his long black hair spilling across me, his head resting gently against my chest, his body clad in a hospital gown barely hung onto the side of my bed. A smile tugged at my lips as I reached up, my hand trembling as I brushed his hair back. Relief, sweet and overwhelming, washed over me. He was alive. He was here. And for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe we might just make it out of this alive. I awoke to Dre shifting in his sleep, but I hesitated to disturb him. The storm outside cast long shadows, and inside, the world felt quiet, expectant. Eric and Kyle had just entered, and their words confirmed it. IID had collapsed after my battle with Casassus. It wasn't much of a surprise, though. The real shock came when they told me Hawkins wanted to offer me a permanent position in the village as a resident detective. Not just me. Dre and Eric had been offered the same. When I asked Carr about why he hadn't been included, he only shrugged. "He hasn't approached me yet," he said, his voice casual, though his eyes carried a hint of something else. "I think he'll wait until the three of you settle in before he adds anyone else." I nodded slowly, my fingers running through Dre's hair absent-mindedly as I listened, my thoughts tangled in a storm of what-ifs and what-nexts. The decision felt inevitable. Maybe it was time to stop chasing shadows, to put down roots and find something stable, something that didn't require endless travel across the country. I told Eric to pass on my acceptance to Hawkins before he and Kyle left. Once the door closed behind them, I settled back onto the pillow, releasing a slow breath, feeling the weight of the day finally lift from my shoulders. For the first time in ages, I allowed myself a moment of peace. Dre was beside me. We had a home. I closed my eyes, the gentle rhythm of the rain outside lulling me into a deep, uninterrupted sleep. Epilogue. A cloaked figure sat at the head of a council of shadowy figures, their faces hidden beneath hoods. The air in the room was thick with tension. "You're certain he will keep his end of the deal?" One of them demanded, his voice a growl, like gravel scraping against stone. His words echoed ominously in the dark chamber. "Yes," the richly dressed man before him said, his voice smooth, almost too confident. "As much as his crassness and bullheadedness may suggest otherwise, his soul is already mine. I only need to collect my due." A murmur spread through the group, like a ripple of unease. Then a woman's voice cut through, soft yet sharp, laced with venom. "Shh! You've always been one to act according to your own will. What makes this time any different? How can we trust you?" Shh smiled, an unsettling grin that seemed to stretch a bit too far, showing rows of white teeth. "Why, Eris, you wound me. Have I not always delivered?" His voice was syrupy sweet, yet there was something lurking beneath, something mocking. The others grumbled, but Eris wasn't satisfied. Her eyes narrowed. "Very well," the leader growled, his voice a low warning. "Do not fail us again. If you do, it will not be your soul we come for, but your very essence. Go, before we change our minds." Sht bowed deeply, his eyes glittering with something dark, before vanishing in a burst of gold smoke. His laughter echoed long after he was gone, fading into the oppressive silence of the chamber. The council remained still, their presence heavy in the air as the torches flickered out one by one. A voice rang out in the void, rich with curiosity. "So, you've heard the story of Ace Maverick, the Lopine detective, a world of humanoid bears, strange happenings, and mysteries. Now it seems there's something darker lurking in Blackwood Village, but will our favorite werewolf investigator unravel it, or will it consume him first?" The voice grew more urgent, its tone carrying a note of warning. I can feel it. The tension, the danger. This is only the beginning. You felt it too, didn't you? Something's coming. And I don't know about you, but I'm already hooked. Let's see where this case takes us next. If you're in, hit the like button and subscribe. Drop your theories about the Blackwood Village mystery in the comments. Let's figure this out together. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and always keep the lights on, just in case. I can already feel the storm on the horizon. There, Now it's more mysterious and filled with dramatic tension. Let me know what you think.